He had seen photographs of the archaeology on the backside of the moon that matched the archaeology in Antarctica.
And that's why all of these big politicians and people are flocking to Antarctica.
Biblical book of Genesis appears to be a distilled, shortened version of the saga of Gilgamesh coming out of Sumeria.
You are disclosure, not the governments. It's you and me and all of us.
And we were told, if you don't do this, they're going to get to it first. And that's what happened within 2 hours. It was unbelievable.
Hundreds of thousands of pieces on a collision course with the Earth.
I do believe that benevolent ETs have helped us through that.
I am convinced that we have powerful allies, and that there is something about this intersection right now that we either are going to move toward less totalitarian state policies of denial, or we're going to move toward ripping off all of these covers, and it will be confirmation tremendously. And it may come through astronomy, it may come through swimming creatures on Enceladus, and it may be, and this is my final, the final thing that went through my head. I can't go into many details. You've been in the same place that I am in right now, but it actually ties to you and Corey and that whole work. I was traveling, and I got an approach by somebody who, since the first contact, I have received records. I know this is a real person with a real military background. And
Then you and I need to have dinner, because I'll get the whole thing out of her privately.
the bottom line was, this person said that he had seen photographs of the archaeology on the backside of the moon that matched the archaeology in Antarctica.
Holy crap.
That matched the archaeology on Mars.
Wow.
He comes in this from a very different point of view, but here is the bottom line that has haunted me. Whether this cannot be heard as hard proof, but this was communicated to me, and it has really haunted me. He said that it was a fact that for at least the last 15 years, that we have had teams going on a regular basis to remove from 2 miles down and other places at pole, is his phrase, at pole, latitude, longitude of pole,
right,
which is very near where that big hole was that the naval engineer I have interviewed, and is the real deal. And it was a football field size with a slant going down, and they really got in trouble for doing that from men in black suits, black ties, and white shirts in 1997. He said for 15 years, we have been taking out bodies, taking out artifacts, taking out all kinds of things that are related to a presence that was there before all of the ice. And the only consensus that I can find anywhere is that geophysicists that are involved in studies of Antarctica and Arctic say that the consensus of when was the last time Antarctica had no ice was 13 million years ago. You may have a different figure, I'm just saying that was said to me. 13 million years. If this is as extensive as this man is telling me he has knowledge, and we are trying to erase a lot of it in order to introduce it to the world, what has happened? That would be saying that this policy of denial on UFOs and ETs starting in World War II would be extended back 13 million years, so that Homo sapiens sapien would never, ever know the truth about this planet. That, to me, if any of that's true, that is the part that all of us should be fighting to understand and report. And you are there.
Okay, yeah. I think you guys grasp the significance of what she's saying here, because we move forward with this Antarctic Atlantis story, and we're told, as I said in my talk yesterday or 2 days ago, which a lot of you probably saw, we were told you have to move on this very, very quickly. So December 11th is when my article came out, 2016, and that same day, 2 hours later, the first tabloid stories about ruins under the ice in Antarctica started to emerge. And we were told, if you don't do this, they're going to get to it first. And that's what happened within 2 hours. It was unbelievable. And we had telegraphed that we were trying to do this, and we were trying to do it quickly. So I definitely feel that this was real and it can be proven. Now, Linda, one of the things that you talked about was Kim Jong-un and this idea of the potential disaster taking place. I do believe that benevolent ETs have helped us through that. And at the same time, we see evidence in our past of great civilizations that did get wiped out in a catastrophe. So Brian Forster, a good friend of mine, saw your talk the other night, and you were presenting some very compelling evidence about how these giant stone structures are not just intact. So could you share with us a little bit about the catastrophe that may have happened before and what's some of the evidence of that?
Sure. Well, Dr. Robert Schoch also covered that from one angle, but it appears that about 12,000 years ago. About 12,000 years ago, there was a cataclysmic event that hammered the planet. One thing you might question is, why is our planet at 23.5 degrees? In a perfect universe, it should be vertical. So the theory is that something happened to the Earth. Paul Laviolette, you may have heard of. He calls it the superwave, and that's that the center of our galaxy, he believes, is not a black hole, but a pulsar. So every half precessional cycle, it emits energy, which then crosses, and this is lethal energy, that crosses the galactic plane, could possibly push comets and things in its path, then entered our galaxy, destroying a planet, making the asteroid belt, went through the sun and shot plasma at our planet. And according to Robert Schoch, the end of the last ice age was this event. And according to him, he said that the oceans rose by at least 300 feet. That is the flood. And that happened in possibly 2 weeks. Not thousands of years, 2 weeks. So doing that, it wasn't simply the melting of ice from the North Pole, it was vaporization. So that super saturated the atmosphere, and then the rain came down for 40 days and 40 nights. Now by doing that, all of a sudden you're displacing mass from one place and redistributing it. That could have caused the planet to suddenly shift. And that's where we also have the stories of archaeologists in Siberia digging up woolly mammoths with fresh food in their mouths. So the theory being that at one point they were wandering around in a temperate environment. The next thing they knew, they were being flash frozen because the planet shifted like that. You also would have had all of the plants on Earth and animals being shifted from, say, the tropics to temperate, or temperate to Arctic. And a vast amount of the human species would also have been wiped out. It's also when the megafauna disappeared in North America. It wasn't Indians killing them off. So also some megalithic, not all megalithic sites, but if you go to Peru and see the megalithic works around Cusco, if you go to Karnak in Egypt, you will see catastrophic damage to these structures. It wasn't invading armies, chipping the noses off of statues. You're talking about vitrification, stone exploding, stone crumbling into sand. And I think that is what happened. And that, to me, indicates that those megalithic structures are at least 12,000 years old. But academics don't want to listen to that because they insist that our first civilizations are maybe 6,000 years old. And what I contend, and along with Barbara Han-Clow, who wrote a book called Catastrophobia, she said what happened to the human psyche was this event didn't take place in a day. There was plasma lightning striking certain places of the earth, hitting the stone, etc. And it caused such a deep disturbance in human consciousness that it took 6,000 years to recover. So rather than Sumeria being the rising of the first civilization, it was a renaissance of those who were left behind, who had any inkling of memory. And that's why the megalithic structures, which were not made by the Inca in Peru, were not made by the dynastic Egyptians, the reason why they're so mysterious is the memory of who made them is gone. And it's only through science that we can try to refigure out the time period, but more and more scientific evidence is pointing to this catastrophic event approximately 12,000 years ago. And also Atlantis. If our planet is up like this, running normally, part of Atlantis is up here in a temperate environment. That's where you have plants, that's where you could have had an advanced civilization. But suddenly the planet shifts by 23.5 degrees. Atlantis didn't sink in the ocean. It's now trapped under ice, is my theory. And that's why all of these big politicians and people are flocking to Antarctica, because I used to laugh at the idea, of pyramids in Antarctica. I honestly think there is something there. They're trying to hush it up, but through the internet, all of us, our disclosure. Not the governments, it's you and me and all of us.
David, could I add just one really interesting, confusing, complicating science data?
Sure, and then I want to throw this to Andrew. I have a question for him, but go ahead.
11,500 years ago, approximately the same size, there's a team in the University of Tucson, about 7 to 8 years ago. They did a paper, it's been in phys.org and all, that the black mat throughout North America of carbon and nanodiamonds, their hypothesis is, they wondered if it was meteors. Now they've done a subsequent paper and they're convinced it was comets, whether it is, but it's something coming in many, not one. And that there was some sort of conflagration in the atmosphere of what was in these comets. And that the fire was in the sky and there was a tremendous amount of pressure, which is what created the millions of square miles of nanodiamonds in this carbon. On the other side of the northern hemisphere, which, by the way, this is the event where they find the saber-toothed tigers with 180-degree turned spines. 33 mammals went extinct with this event, all in what we would call North America. On the other side of the planet, I called and talked with an astronomer who's been looking for cycles, anything that would relate to something coming through, including the Nibiru issue. And he said that they have really looked hard for anything that would be like a counterpoint to what happened in North America 11,500 years ago. And they cannot find it on the other side of the northern hemisphere, which would mean that Gobekli Tepe in southern Turkey, right near the Syrian border in that area, it was unaffected by what happened on the other side of the planet.
You're preempting my question to Andrew.
I'll throw it to him. All of this is to say that the complexity of what had been built at Gobekli Tepe 12,000 years ago, and then the burying of Gobekli Tepe, and then the Northern Hemisphere event, it is as if whatever made Gobekli Tepe definitely knew something that was coming. And the complexity of what happened at that time is still a huge scientific mystery.
Absolutely. Andrew, let me just modify that a little bit. We have seen really reliable scholarship from Zecharia Sitchin showing that the biblical book of Genesis appears to be a distilled, shortened version of the saga of Gilgamesh coming out of Sumeria. And his theory was that the Adamu, or the primitive worker, was made by the Anunnaki, the Adam, as in Adam and Eve. How do you see these events converging with, as she said, Gobekli Tepe and the aftermath of this great catastrophe?
Well, let's point out the time frame of Gobekli Tepe. It was constructed around 9,600 BC. That's the very end date, not only of a mini ice age that had lasted for 1,200 years and began suddenly, as Brian said, probably within a few weeks, certainly within a generation, And it was on the onset of an ice age which shouldn't have happened. I mean, the true ice age had already ended. It was getting warm again, and everything looked really cozy, nice golden age was beginning to dawn again. And then suddenly the ice is back. Why? Well, because a comet almost certainly entered into the inner solar system, probably went round the sun, and probably broke up at this point, sending pieces, hundreds of thousands of pieces, on a collision course with the Earth. And they would have come like a freight train of beads hitting the Earth, exploding around 10,800 BC initially. And what this did was not only to create wildfires and the instantaneous evaporation of large parts of the ice sheets in North America in particular, but it also sent all of this debris up into the atmosphere, blocking off the light in what would have been called, what we call today a nuclear winter, blocking out the sun and the moon and the stars for an extended period of time. And this, combined with other things that were going on in the oceans or whatever, triggered this ice age. But what it also did was that when finally this nuclear winter stopped, all of this debris came back down as either acid rain or gradually settled on the ground, blown about, and it created this, as Linda said, what's known in America as the black mat. Now it's about 5 inches in thickness.
5 inches, really?
Yeah,
I didn't know it was that
I've
big.
seen this. I've looked at it and I've actually scooped some of it out in Holland, right on the border between Holland and Belgium, where it was first actually identified and is actually known as the Eucilla horizon. And the Eucilla horizon can be found all the way around the world. Linda, what you probably don't know is that it's actually been found in Egypt, it's been found in Australia, it's been found in various parts of Russia, it's been found in South America, and obviously in North America, it's known as the black mat. And it does appear as if the impact created what they call a strewn field. In other words, the peppering of all the smaller fragments occurred right the way across the Atlantic, causing massive tsunamis, and that it continued on into Europe, right the way across to the Middle East, within 100 miles or so of Gobekli Tepe. There's a place there called Abu Huraya, which is in northern Syria, where they've actually found the same things that they found in North America, these nanodiamonds, the glass spherules, iridium, all the different signs of an impact event. So the area around Gobekli Tepe didn't get away from it. But as Brian said, Barbara Hand-Clo's idea about catastrophophobia is spot on. And you know, the idea that comets, every time a comet would have come into the sky thereafter, people would have been in fear that the world was about to end again. And they didn't have psychologists or psychoanalysts in them days, or counsellors that you could go and tell your problems. They had shamans. And they obviously went to the shamans and said, look, we're worried that the world's about to end. Can you do something about it? They said, no problem. You know, all you've got to do is listen to what we've got to say. And part of that would have been to construct these monuments where they would have done shamanic rituals to appease the supernatural forces, the creatures, the supernatural creatures, which I think were seen in terms of a wolf or a fox or a canine generally, and to try and stop these creatures from destroying the world. And memories of this are found in myths and legends all over the world about obviously the original catastrophe and how the shamans tried to stop it. And in fact, there are actually myths and legends that say that after the great catastrophe, which involved fire and flood and things falling out the sky and a period of darkness, the priests built the first temples. And this is why we see Gobekli Tepe in southeast Turkey on the top of a mountaintop, looking like 20 Stonehenges, but you know, covered in beautiful carvings of animals and, you know, human forms and things like this. That's why it's there. But it's a time capsule. We need to understand it. You know, many of the speakers here this weekend, you know, Graham, myself, I know Robert Schock and others clearly have been talking about Gobekli Tepe. You know, this is our connection to the past, the lost civilization. That's why it's so important to, our heritage.
If you enjoyed this, make sure to watch the next video on Awaken Zone. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, but you won't want to miss what's coming next.